Hello, intellectuals. Welcome to this session. In this tutorial, we are going to look at cell structure and functions. So stay tuned as we try to break down this topic in simpler terms so that it will be very easy for us to grasp the concept and reproduce it during our exams, our tests, our quizzes, and the like. So let's start with knowing what cells are. Let's start by understanding what a cell is. It all begins from understanding the basics. We try by all means to make things basic, not too sophisticated or complicated, rather. It's just at a basic level. So a cell, we define it as a basic unit of living thing, right? So we say a basic unit of a living thing. So that is what we call a cell. It is just the basic unit of living thing. Let's look at the cell organization. When we are talking about the cell organization, we are talking about how the organelles are able to form an organism. So from organelles are able to join together. Okay? They're able to combine and combine. They're able to grow and form what are known as cells. Then these cells also combine to form what are known as the tissues. These tissues also combine to form what is known as an organ. These organs will further combine to form what is known as a system. Now, this system is what is a group of systems is what is going to form an organism. Have you seen how an organism is formed? So an organism is a complex now. It's a complex, we can say a complex thing, okay? An organism is a complex thing. Then the organelles are the basic things that make up this complex thing we are terming as an organism. So this is very important for us to understand. Now, one thing I want you to understand is that a cell is made up of the two basic parts, okay? A cell is just made up of the two basic parts. And these basic parts, the first one, I want us to understand is the plasma membrane. Okay? Plasma membrane, someone might be wondering, what's a plasma membrane? We're just talking about the cell membrane. So the plasma membrane is just the cell membrane. Okay? These are the two important things I want us to understand. Then the other thing, it is the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm is the one which surrounds the nucleus, right? And this cytoplasm, you need to understand that the cytoplasm is made up of some important things. Cytoplasm. It's made up of some important things which we'll talk about. So the things which make up the cytoplasm, we have what is known as the cytosol. When you're talking about the cytosol, you're just referring to the fluid, okay, in the cell. So this is the fluid in the cell. But when you talk about the other parts of this cytoplasm, other than the cytosol, we have what are known as the organelles. These organelles are the one now which represent the particles in the cell. Okay? We have different types and various organelles. But I need you to understand one thing. One thing I want you to take home is that not all organelles are particles. Not all organelles are particles. It is very important for us to appreciate that concept that not all organelles are particles. And when we're talking about these organelles, When you're talking about these organelles, they are metabolically active. Now, what do I mean by metabolically active? This simply means that they're able to participate in metabolic reaction. Metabolically, they are metabolically what? Active. Meaning they're able to participate in metabolic reaction. What are these reactions? It could be the making of energy, the storing of DNA, those metabolic reactions. Now, these organelles are able to participate in those. So let's look at now classification. Let's look at classification of cells. So cells are classified in two. Okay? Cells are just classified in two. There is one type of cell which is known as the prokaryote. So one type is known as the prokaryotes. The other type is known as the eukaryote. Once you understand the prokaryotes and the eukaryote, then you are done with cells. You need also to go and rest, because by just understanding this, you would have covered what prokaryotes and what cells are, in short. This pro on prokaryotes means before. Pro means before. So these were the cells which were discovered first. Okay? They were first to be discovered. No wonder this pro means before. Now, what is it about these prokaryotic cells? What is it about the prokaryotic cells? Or prokaryotes? Or prokaryotic cells? What is it about these prokaryotic cells? So, one thing you need to understand is that these do not have a membrane-bound organelles. Do not have a membrane-bound. These do not have a membrane-bound organelles. We understand as we move further. I'll explain what I mean by membrane-bound organelle, what it means. So the other thing you need to understand is that these prokaryotic cells, they are found in the cytoplasm. Okay? They are found in the cytoplasm because the prokaryotes do not have a true nucleus. So they are found in cytoplasm. Now let's understand something. Let's have some differences between the prokaryotes or prokaryotic cells and also the eukaryotes, or what we are calling the eukaryotic cell. What are some of the differences? So one difference is that when you're talking about the prokaryote, these are simple. They are simple structures. But when you talk of eukaryotes, like a human being has a eukaryotic type of a cell, okay? They are complex, okay? You need to understand that. Then this one, the prokaryotes do not have true nucleus. Not true nucleus. Very important. The eukaryotes have true nucleus. Okay? So we need to understand that also. Then, when you're talking about the prokaryotes are small in size. The eukaryotes are big. They are really big in size. Okay? And the other thing I want you to understand is that the cell of the prokaryote is made up of the peptidoglycan. Okay? This one, for prokaryotes, is made up of the peptidoglycan. The cell is made up of the peptidoglycan. But when you're talking about the cell of the eukaryote, is made up of the chitin and the cellulose, which is a carbohydrate. Okay, so that is very important for us to appreciate. Other than that, we can also look at the kind of ribosome which is found in these two. So in prokaryotes rather, you find that it has a small ribosome. Okay? But in eukaryotes, it has a large ribosome. So that is also very cardinal for us to understand. Then, when you're talking about the eukaryotes, these are just unicellular. Okay? They are unicellular. But when you're talking about for prokaryotes, they are just unicellular. But these can be both unicellular and also multicellular. Okay? For eukaryotes, they can be both. Then, for prokaryotes, I said there are no membrane-bound nucleus. No membrane organelles, sorry. No membrane-bound organelles. But when we talk of the eukaryotes, these have membrane-bound organelles. It is very much important for us to appreciate this concept. So what are these membrane-bound organelles? When you're talking about the membrane-bound organelles, we're talking about structures like the nucleus, we can talk of structures like the cell membrane, okay? Various structures. Those are membrane-bound membrane-bound organelles rather, okay? And one thing I need also us to understand is that the prokaryotes, they do not have this membrane bound, so meaning that they do not have the true nucleus, they do not have the cell membrane, okay? Those membrane bound nucleus. Let's look at some similarities between these two. Let's look at similarities between the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes. So, one thing you need to understand is that they both contain DNA. But the location of DNA is what differs, where it is found. So, we'll talk about that, don't worry. And you need also to understand that they both have the ribosomes, okay? And also, they both have the cell membrane. They both have the cell membrane. I think for membrane-bound organelles, cell membrane is not part of the membrane-bound. The membrane-bound includes structures like the nucleus, okay? The nucleus is membrane-bound. Other than that, we can also talk about what other things are membrane-bound. Maybe we can talk about, okay, the ribosomes are found in both. So ribosomes, we can't term them to be membrane-bound. But when we look at structures like these structures, the chloroplasts, okay, those which are membrane-bound, so the prokaryotes do not have those. So it's very important for us to understand. Let's look at the prokaryotic cell, the actual prokaryotic cell. So let me draw this as like this. Okay, I'll draw this like that. Okay, so I'm drawing a structure. Which looks something like that. Okay, so this is the structure of the prokaryotic cell. There are certain things I want us to understand. This is the nucleus we are seeing. So this nucleus, it is circular, okay? It is known as the nucleoid. It is known as the nucleoid. Then this one, the thing you are seeing like a tail, this is the flagellum. We'll talk about the functions, don't worry about that. Then we may have these structures. These structures inside there, those are the ribosomes. Okay? Then you may have the DNA there, just in the cytoplasm. That DNA in the cytoplasm is what is known as the plasmid. Plasmid, okay? Of course, we know that is the plasma protein, so there's no need even to label it. Then we have this which looks like hairs, okay? These are what are known as the pili. Then of course we have the cytoplasm inside. Now let's look at some of the functions of these parts. Let's look at the functions. So, when you're talking about the functions, let's start with the pill. So this pill, it is involved in reproduction, okay? When you're talking about the flagellum is just used to translocate. It's just for movement, okay? This flagellum, it just assists in movement. It's like the way a human being has legs, right? Legs are used for translocation. They assist in movement. So same applies to this flagellum. But when you're talking about the plasmid, this plasmid contains DNA. Okay? They contain the DNA. So there are two parts which contain DNA in the prokaryotic cell. The nucleoid contains DNA, but in the nucleoid it is just circular. But when you're talking about another DNA, it is found in the plasmid. So it is very important for us to appreciate this concept as we are looking at this topic, because basically we are talking about the functions and all that. So it's very important. Now let's look at the types of bacteria. Types of bacteria. So bacteria are classified based on their ability to retain what is known as the gram stain. Okay? So in such rationale, we have what are known as the gram-positive bacteria, and the other type, which is called the gram-negative bacteria. So what is it about the gram-positive and the gram-negative? So when you're talking about the gram-positive, these are able to retain the gram stain. They're able to be stained, in short. They can be stained by the gram stain. But when you're talking about the gram-negative, this cannot be stained by the gram stain. That is very important for us to understand. So it is very much important for us to understand this. When you talk of gram-positive bacteria, they can be stained by the gram stain, but the gram-negative cannot be stained by the gram stain. Then another thing I mentioned to say that when you have the prokaryotic cells, the cell, it is made up of the peptidoglycan, but for the cell of eukaryotes, it's made up of the cellulose or maybe the chitin, okay? So it is very important. Now let's look at the eukaryotic cells. When you're talking about the eukaryotic cells, they're just the cells we looked at even at secondary school. So that is just those simple things, right? Okay. So they're just the plant cell and the animal cell. Those simple stuff. So this is the animal cell, this is the plant cell. You understand to say the plant cell must have a cell, right? Yeah. So this is the plant cell. Then that is the animal cell. So these are the the eukaryotes, okay? You understand to say that is the nucleus. Even there, we have that part, which is called the nucleus. Okay? That is the nucleus, of course, that is the cytoplasm. Okay? That is the cell wall. Yeah. Then those things inside, that is the chloroplast. But in animal cells, they are not chloroplast. Okay? Then you may have things which look like that, a sausage-like structure. May have things which look like a sausage structure. So those are what we call the mitochondria. The mitochondria. So it is very important for us to appreciate that concept. So let's now look at the functions of the parts. We've just said, of course, we know the function of the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is just to contain the cell organelles, right? It's made up of two parts, the cytosol and the organelles. So basically, it is just to contain the cell organelles, and this is where most of the chemical reactions occur. So when you're talking about the nucleus, for the nucleus, this contains the DNA. This one contains the DNA, the genetic information. And from our secondary, we learned that the nucleus is which controls all cell activities, right? It controls all the cell activities. So when you're talking about the nucleus, the process of transcription, the conversion of DNA to DNA, the process of this is replication, sorry. The conversion of DNA to DNA, the process of transcription, the conversion of DNA to RNA, specifically the mRNA, the messenger RNA, then the conversion of RNA to proteins. Okay? So for eukaryotic cells, all these processes take place in the nucleus. So you see that the nucleus is very important, right? In short, the process ending up to here, the process of conversion of DNA to DNA, transcription, and also ending up to here, and also the conversion of DNA to RNA take place in the nucleus. Only for the RNA to proteins, that is the one which takes place in the cytoplasm now. So it is very important for us to understand. Now let's look at the function of another organelle, the mitochondria. What is the function of the mitochondria? We said it is the power source of the cell, right? So this is for energy production. For energy production. So when you're talking about the mitochondria, that's where respiration occurs, and respiration leads to production of energy. Okay? Let's look at another organelle. Let's look at the vacuole. When you're talking about the vacuole, this contains the cell sap. And we know that the cell sap, it's the one which helps now the cell in removing those toxic metabolic substances, and also in maintaining what is known as the osmotic potential. Okay, it balances in terms of the osmotic potential, because the cell sap is made up of the water, is made up of the salts, made up of the sugars. Okay, so it's very important in the cell. Let's look at the chloroplast. So for the chloroplast, we discover that this is the one which contains what is known as the chlorophyll. So it contains the chlorophyll. And we understand that the function of the chlorophyll is just to convert that light energy into what? Into chemical energy during photosynthesis, or for photosynthesis to take place, so that an organism, the plant cell, is able to carry out photosynthesis, right? Then let's talk about this cell membrane. So this cell membrane is sometimes known as the plasma membrane. So it's just one and the same thing when you hear the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. But one thing about the cell membrane is that this cell membrane we are talking about, it has two parts. Okay, let me draw it. So it can have it is termed to be a phospholipid bilayer. So it has a head. It has a head which is made up of the phosphate group. Okay. It has this head made up of the phosphate group. It has also the tail. Phosphate there. Okay, so we can have this phosphate group. So we have this head. The head is, since it is made up of the phosphate group, the head is hydrophilic. When you're talking about something hydrophilic, philic means love, so it loves water. Okay, so the head is hydrophilic, but the tail is hydrophobic. Phobic means hate or fear. So the tail hates water. Okay, so that is one of the important things you need to understand. And we understand to say that this tail is saturated because you can't see any double bond, but this one, it is kinked, it is unsaturated due to the presence of the double bond. And because this cell membrane is both hydrophobic and hydrophilic at the same time, it can be termed to be antipathic, because an antipathic substance is that substance which is both hydrophobic and hydrophilic at the same time. So it is very important for us to understand that. Very much important. Okay? So let's look at another organelle. Let's look at another organelle. But even before we can look at another organ, let's look at the cell membrane. Let's look at the cell membrane.